Hi, I'm Jennifer Fening. I'm a Deputy Director in the City of Columbus's Department of Development and the project lead for the Reimagining Columbus project. And today we have with us two leaders from Mayor Andrew Ginther's office who were part of the decisions to place the Christopher Columbus statue into storage and to open up this community conversation. So I'll ask you each to introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Jason Jenkins. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer for the City of Columbus.
Hello, my name is Ken Paul. I'm a former Chief of Staff for Andrew Ginther.
So, Ken, Jason, do you mind telling me about your role in the mayor's office, your time there?
I'll start. At the time, I was serving as Chief of Staff, and I had been in the position for just about a year and a half, I think, at that point.
And I was the Director of External Affairs, and I think I've been in that position pretty much about 5 years total. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about the gift of the statue and the sister city relationship between Columbus and Genoa, as you understand it, as you recall?
Yeah, the statue was a gift of the people of Genoa, 1950s, 1955, and actually sat right outside my office. A great view of the downtown riverscape, but right out my window was the back of the statue. It's something that I saw on a daily basis. But it's one of those things where I don't know, in the daily business of the city, didn't think about it much. But very important to a large segment of our community. Certainly it's our namesake, and very important to our sister city relationship with the people of Genoa. And as time and actions unfolded, it's been a real effort to try and maintain open communication and dialogue and explain the circumstances of that moment and since, and trying to maintain the relationship with our friends in Genoa.
We'll go into some more of that. I think we all remember where we were in the summer of 2020 and experiences and how they affected us. But for the sake of the recording, for where we've been, can you talk about Columbus in the spring, summer of 2020? What was going on in community and civic life?
Well, just going back in time and actually checking the dates, which, in some ways, we've all endured so much over these last several years that some of these events run together, and the timing of them, it gets gray over time. But George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, and I went and checked the date. We took Christopher Columbus down July 1st. So it's a relatively short period of time where between George Floyd's death and when the statue was ultimately removed, the city was in a really tumultuous state. Most major cities in our country, really angry, unsettled. We were in the summer and the temperature was rising beyond just the summer days. People were hurting. Daily protests. And we were doing our best in leadership roles to respond to events that hadn't occurred in our lifetime and that were impacting Columbus in a way that Columbus residents had never seen, even dating back to the Civil Rights movement. And so it was a really tense period of time for our community. We had, in my opinion, gotten caught a little flat-footed. Going back a little bit further in time, but again, really not all that far back, just 60, 90 days before. We had just shut down the community. COVID had its arms wrapped around our country, our way of life. Everything had been turned on its head. People had been locked down, pent up in their homes. We were still working our way through the pandemic when George Floyd was murdered, and I think did not immediately realize the impact of that event and how it would reverberate through our society and touch people in Columbus in ways that similar events in other cities hadn't before. And in a way, we were playing a little bit of catch up and trying to get back out in front. And so we had actually, one of the things I'm more proud of with Jason's help, really used those events to galvanize movement and action, and had really begun making some significant changes that our community hadn't seen before, and having conversations around police reform and equity and race that we hadn't had in a long time. And I felt we were making good progress. But the statue became intertwined in many of those conversations. It wasn't top of mind for many, but it was for some. And the statue, as time went on, made it more and more difficult to have some of the more meaningful conversations we needed to be having. And then ultimately, for a period of time leading up to its removal, was at the center of where do we go from here, and what do we want to do, and how are we going to change as a community. Jason, what are your thoughts?
Really, to echo what you said, Ken, a lot of it was things that, from my lens, it was things that we were already putting in place as a city. Certain police reform measures, conversations that had already been had. I think the thing that we had on our side was from an external perspective with the mayor's office, we had good relationships with various community partners. But as Ken said, it was just compounding on top of, we went to a skeleton crew in the mayor's office. So decisions, it couldn't walk down the hallway and have a conversation. It was pick up the phone, send an email, make sure they're not on the Zoom, mind you, while keeping all the city services operating at the same time. There was, we created a thing called a JIC. Hats off to Zane Jones, who helped us organize that, just to make sure that trash was still getting picked up, phone calls were still getting made, because there was nobody physically in the office. And then the murder of George Floyd, we had instances here where officers were engaging. And so locally we were dealing with our own issues as it related to police, civil unrest, but then also nationally, and that fueled. And so having these dialogue, these conversations with our community partners, it's very hard to do when you have untold stories of how racism and just horrific things that has happened in our history still being symbolized. So there were things that needed to happen to make sure that we can continue that dialogue, and it needed to happen in a manner that we could communicate with the community, and then also make sure that there were individuals and stakeholders who are proud of different things, that symbolism and making sure that they were heard as well. So trying to hear it from all sides, trying to get it from all understandings, and doing the best thing and the right thing for our community was always at top of mind. It was just, how do you do that in the moment that we were in?
I know during the civil unrest, there were many evenings that you spent out on the streets with the people who were, expressing their feelings and their needs. What were some of the things you heard and experienced during that summer? Anger,
frustration. It was a time for action. It wasn't a time for words. They wanted to see action. And so I think that we got to a point where we were able to engage and show that action, but then there was also a level of understanding of what could and couldn't be done immediately. So identifying the low-hanging fruit, bringing those things together, and really creating those actionable items. I spent many nights downtown with community members, but for the most part, it was frustration, it was anger, but then it was also this sense of, you hear me now, you know, you will hear me, and you will hear what we have to say as a collective. And I think that, honestly, it was one of those reckonings that needed to happen, believe it or not. But when they realized the city was listening and we were acting on, and there was some level of understanding, that we did better together. So I will say that, you know, a lot came out of that. A lot of positive came out of what was so negative in that space.
What was your personal opinion of the statue before 2020? Ken, you mentioned it kind of was in the background every day. How did that start to change as you were engaging with the community and hearing from the community?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I look back, and it is a monument that I had seen and almost looked past a million times. Because if you think about it, how often do you think of why you're named who you are? You know, it's just it's part of our identity. But in many ways, for me personally, it didn't define who we were as a people today. It was a symbol of our namesake, and it was important. I knew the history behind it in terms of our relationship with the people of Genoa, Italy. But frankly, in my position as chief of staff, focused on getting things done, running the city on the daily, you don't stop and pause and think about things like that much. It wasn't until events of the day that you started to realize that, wow, it's not something that I thought about much. And that when I saw that statue, I really looked past it. For a lot of people in our community, it was a symbol of something that had gone unspoken and left untouched for way too long. And that it stirred very deep emotion. And it made it very difficult for them to view the city as credible and as a partner, as someone who was willing to engage, to get better, to do better, as long as it was standing. And there was some internal conversation about whether or not that was real or not. And it was a question of, well, who's coming to us? When they're talking about police reform, are they talking about Christopher Columbus? Well, no, they're not. But it doesn't that mean that one is important, the other is not. And over time, as we worked through issues, as we began listening to people and what they were expecting of us, it really did become apparent that it was very real and stirred very real emotions. And it was making it difficult to have that next conversation, to get to a point where we could begin healing, where people were actually leaning in together to make change. That as long as that stood right there, we weren't ever going to get to where we were trying to go. And it really evolved over a relatively quick period of time. And in the end, we'll talk more about the events leading up to that actual day when we decided to take it down, and the conversations really leading up to that moment. But skipping ahead to what happened after, the backlash wasn't what we feared. And in fact, in many ways, it was almost like a sigh and an exhale, because we can move on to the next conversation. It didn't solve any problems. It didn't make anything better. But it allowed us to move forward and to continue the dialogue and continue to work on the reforms we were seeking.
I think, in our history, and just going to school here in Columbus City schools, you're taught Christopher Columbus founded, the Americas, and, you're not taught the real history behind the symbolism. So I think for many, at least for myself, you just walk through life and you don't look at it as a symbol of all this negativity and things that have happened. And so I think now it was a chance for us to say, what's the true history behind this? So often has the true history of America been watered down, changed completely, fairy-taled up, right? And so I think this will be one of many moments in the city's history where we will be able to tell a true, honest history as it relates to not just Christopher Columbus, but how we develop and grow. And what does that mean, right? What does that mean to have a true, honest understanding? For me, it is you have to confront the truth first. And once you confront the truth, you can see how the barriers were created, and then start tearing down those barriers and start making it more equitable for a city, as a city. And like Ken said, confronting the realization that this statue, the largest statue in the country, might I add, of Christopher Columbus, symbolized so many negative things to so many people, being such a diverse city, right? We have to be honest and be real with that and look at our neighbors and say, look, I hear you may have a different point of view, but let's have this dialogue around that point of view, and let me explain to you from my end what I'm seeing. And so I think this is a chance for us to have a real honest conversation. Just stop walking past the statue. I was there, I was with Ken, I didn't pay it any attention because I was taught, not to. But now we're forced to have this conversation, and I think we'll be better as a city for it.
It's an old adage, when you know better, you do better, right?
Absolutely.
There have been calls by the indigenous community since the Santa Maria was on the Scioto Peninsula to remove the statue and for Columbus to stop participating in the retelling of Christopher Columbus's story. Can you talk about what you heard the statue meant to them and the engagement with that community?
So I'm, to be brutally honest and clear, I don't think there was a whole lot of engagement from the indigenous, at least from external affairs perspective, with the indigenous community. I know we would engage at certain times throughout the year for various reasons, but not a consistent conversation. And this opportunity allowed us to create the committee to talk about the statue. And so in that committee, I only attended a couple of the meetings, was able to attend a couple of the meetings. You had Italian Americans, you had individuals from the indigenous community, you had city officials and leaders, and you had individuals from the various African American community with different perspectives and educations and understanding. And this dialogue took place. And I think that was one of the beauties of what has taken place, is that the dialogue amongst these groups, because I don't even think they knew the groups were organized and existed prior to that committee. And since then, council has taken a huge leap, and I want to give credit where credit's due with President Hardin and Council Member Barroso de Padilla in engaging our indigenous community, bringing them to council, working with them through city processes, and making sure their voice is heard. And so prior to this, these things weren't happening. These groups weren't having conversation. And then the committee is formed, and now here we are, again, better as a city, because we are now able to engage with different groups and different organizations that represent different parts of our community. And again, able to tell a better story of who we are. And then again, for our children, put on display how they should engage the residents of Columbus in a very holistic way. And so I think that having that ability and that opportunity to bring these groups to the table and have this dialogue is going to better us as a city. And I think through this process, they will be even more engaged and more supported, not just from the government standpoint, but as a whole. Because now other individuals, think about city council, the individuals that watch are there, are able to see, oh, there's an organization that we can engage with, that we can talk to, that we can ask questions of, and that we can go and support in various ways, from a public sector, a private sector. I think there's all kinds of opportunities opening up in this space.
Jennifer, you brought up another memory in mentioning the Santa Maria, which is also interesting to think that the decision to remove the Santa Maria, the community conversations that happened, very different set of circumstances, and I think we have the opportunity to do much better here. Whether we set out with that intention or not, and whatever our motivations were in the moment, we have an opportunity to have conversations and true dialogue that I don't think we had as a community when we relocated to Santa Maria. And Jason is correct. If we're being truthful and honest with ourselves, we were not engaging Indigenous communities and having these types of conversations beforehand. I think largely everyone would agree to that, regardless of where you sit in this community. But I think this experience has made us realize that when you don't tell one group's story, it is very difficult for any other group to tell theirs. And so when you gloss over certain moments in history because they may be less relevant, you may not be able to relate. Too much time has passed, or you don't know or connect with the culture in a way that it makes it real for you. It doesn't make it any less real. And when you don't acknowledge it, and when you don't engage, when you don't learn, it makes it very difficult for the groups to follow, to tell their story, and for us to continue to learn and grow. And so I think through those conversations, there were heated discussions and many different divergent points of view, but all had to be heard for us to be able to move forward.
Do you mind elaborating on what does the statue mean to our Italian American community? We see it a lot in the context of in 1955, a lot of people were still experiencing discrimination in the Italian American community, and so the gift of the statue helped them feel seen. So do you mind talking a little bit about what you've heard from our Italian American constituents, what the statue means to them, why they might have acknowledged what was going on in our community but had sentimental feelings about it's being taken down?
Yeah, so for the Italian Americans that I know and engage with sometimes on a daily basis, it was around that time. I mean, you got to understand they were migrants, immigrants, and refugees themselves. And around that time, there was a lot of discrimination. They had a section of the city that they were kind of corralled to. And so when this relationship was created, from my understanding and my recollection of what I was told, it created a sense of pride, right? They had, like you said, have been seen, have been, are starting to become accepted with their own culture, religion, focus, areas of focus, interests. And so this was a kind of a way to say, here we are, and we are established here in Columbus. We do feel a sense of belonging, so to speak, and we are being recognized for that. And I think at the time, it was one of those situations where this was a space where we became welcoming, right? I think that has evolved. I think we are evolving into a space where it's not just for any one community or individual. Columbus is for all. Columbus is a place where all people should feel a sense of belonging, and should not feel like they are being separated or segregated or there are inequitable practices taking place. It's crazy that we are having a dialogue around this symbol, but I think there was a meaning behind the symbol that was completely different from what the historical context will say. And I think we have to look at it in the period of 1955, and now we have to look at it in the period of 2020, and now we have to look at it in the period of 2024. right? And where does that history lead us? Where do we make those connections and create this space for, again, everyone to feel that sense of belonging, that sense of pride, that sense of, this is my city, and I'm here, and I'm meant to be here, I'm supposed to be here, I'm welcomed here. And so I think we can create that, but understanding the different historical contexts behind each one of those steps is going to be key.
I think it's such an interesting irony with the statue that in 1955, it made some people feel very seen. But if you take it forward to 2020, it was something that made some people still feel very much on the outside looking in. And so it's interesting how the symbology of the statue has had this relationship with welcoming and inclusion.
Yeah. And Jennifer, I was just thinking back at the conversations I had in the days immediately following, and I met with leadership of our Italian American organizations. We have a very strong, engaged, active Italian American community who are beautiful people who have a great sense of pride and passion for their heritage. And the one thing that, in thinking back, that I recall is a sense of hurt and pain in their voice and frustration, because their heritage was being associated with very negative things, with racism, with oppression, with marginalization. And that is not how they viewed their heritage. And so to your point, to Jason's, it's this balancing of perspectives, ensuring we're hearing and acknowledging that those very real emotions it was very painful for them. They felt disrespected, and the people that we were working with and talking to, that I was listening to and hearing from, they didn't want to perpetuate the discrimination, the oppression, any more than anyone else. But we're feeling as if they were being made the problem, that they're the reason, that it's you. And that's very personal. And those are conversations that needed to be worked through and still, in many ways, need to be aired. I hope that this process gives us the opportunity to really acknowledge those feelings and then figure out how we move forward, and how do we really make sure that we don't continue to repeat history. Because the reality is that this country has a rich tradition of oppressing the last person or group of people in. And so in 1955, Italian Americans were feeling like they had just gotten ahead, they had just gotten their footing, they were being seen, they were legitimate, they were part of our community. How do we ensure that moving forward, we don't continue to do that with new Americans, with other immigrant populations, and that we truly welcome them into our community, and we don't continue to do the same thing over and over and over again. And this project has the opportunity to change that.
What opinions were weighed when determining what to do with the statue? How did internal conversations, community conversations, how did those conversations go?
I remember the probably the most important conversation is whether or not this was going to make it easier to have the conversations we need to have, or if it was going to be a distraction and shift focus away from the conversations we needed to have as a community. Because it all boils down to is how does this statue relate to what's going on right now in this moment? And are they related? Is it relevant? Or are we allowing others to hijack the moment to redirect the conversation or shift the focus from something we really need to be having a conversation about, which was really race relations in our community and making our community more equitable and acknowledging inequities and wrongs that had persisted despite repeated attempts to get better. The reality is we weren't better. We aren't better. We still have work to do. But was this going to be a distraction? And are we allowing the conversation to be hijacked And are we shifting time and energy away from what really matters to talk about this statue? Or is this statue actually part of the conversation? And ultimately, what we decided is that one way or the other, the conversations that needed to be had, that we were focused on, that we were having at that moment, weren't going to be able to continue and weren't going to be productive unless we addressed the issue of the statue. And so really that was probably the most important question. Once you decide that you have to take it down, then everything else, it comes a lot easier, and it becomes more tactical and strategic, and you understand what it is you're trying to achieve and why you're doing it. But really, it was what role does this statue play in the conversations that we're having and the change that we're trying to make?
For me, in the role that I played, so like Ken explained, it was a very short amount of time. But I was in the midst of getting the phone calls, the emails. I can't tell you how many phone calls I received about the statue on a consistent basis. Not just one time, but consistently, emails. Out in the community, like I said, I spent a lot of time in the evenings during the marches, and because I wanted to be hands-on. I was down there every day, essentially. And so when you started, and then I started to actually pay a little bit more attention to the statue and starting to realize how big it was and where it actually sat in proximity to City Hall. And then you start to see large vehicles with ropes in the back, and then you start to look across the country and you start to see other monuments coming down that are minuscule compared to a 3-ton statue. For me, it started to become more of a safety issue than it did symbolism. The right amount of force, it would have caused a serious problem for the community. And so from my lens, I shared that with leadership after one evening of seeing 2 to 3 ton trucks driving around the statue in City Hall a couple times, saying we might have a problem, a serious problem, or just and the amount of people that were out there at that time. So yeah, it started to become more of a concern, and we notified security, and they started watching the statue more. You would have individuals that would come up, watch it, stare at it with vehicles that had the ability to pull it down. So we got, for me, it became more of a safety issue.
That's a really important part, and I'm sure we'll pick up on it at some point in the conversation, but that's a point we hadn't made. Yeah, we weren't alone and having these community conversations, these dialogues, these internal struggles and debates. This was happening in communities across America, and statues were falling. And not just statues of Confederate soldiers, but other Christopher Columbus statues had been vandalized, painted. I think the head of the statue in Boston had been taken off. And so this wasn't really hypothetical. The City Hall campus had been vandalized. And keep in mind, the protests of that summer were downtown. They literally just a couple hundred feet away from where Christopher Columbus stood. Not at the center of most of those protests, but there was a lot of marches right past it every day. And you started picking up on social media, and there was a feeling that if they didn't take it down, we were going to take it down. Depending on what side of that argument you're on or what position you're in, that could have meant that this is you and a group of friends, or it could mean that the city was going to step in and actually take it down in a safe, orderly fashion, preserve it, ensure it wasn't vandalized, and keep it safe until we can have a conversation about where do we go from here. But yeah, Jason's points are well taken.
So tell me about the day it was taken down from City Hall. What was the process and what were the reactions?
It does shift a little bit more tactical and just practical in nature, and figuring out the timing of it, how you communicate it. It's a balance of not being secretive, but also not creating a spectacle. It's about letting people know it was going to happen with a relatively short period of time, so that you don't create a situation where someone tries to prevent it, or where the situation becomes dangerous because you have too many people on site. The idea was to be able to get in quickly, to safely remove it, to take care to preserve it, and to be able to move it off site quickly. And so, from the time the decision was made to the day we moved, it was a very short period of time. It's a matter of days, it's not hours. And then I recall a relatively limited number of contractors with the actual ability to do something of that nature. But we were able to come in the early hours of the morning, having announced it the evening before, and it was safely removed and on the back of a flatbed bed, safely secured and relocated. My recollection was by noon, without incident. No one was hurt. Now, the one thing I recall, and it gets back to Jason's point of, this thing was going to come down one way or the other. It was secured in place by a pin that was about a foot tall. Nothing else. The weight of the statue and one pin. And it would not have taken much to pull it down. And it was an issue of safety. And beyond that, to those, and there were voices out there who were very upset that we were taking this down. It was an insult to their heritage, to who they were as a people. They did not see the connection between the statue and the other conversations we were having. But if it had been taken down by vandals or those who were just hurting and had enough of this symbol, it very likely would have been destroyed in a way that would have made it very difficult to repair and to ever put back in its proper context and to tell the real story and the background. So in many ways, once the decision to remove it was made, the action was quick. We were able to remove it without incident, and we were able to put it in safekeeping. And it's one of many decisions in a very tumultuous year and a difficult period in our city's history that I think was the right decision, and we did it the right way.
I agree with everything Ken said, and I want to highlight that, again, it was a 3-ton statue with water ducts underneath for a fountain. So the likelihood of a 3-ton statue coming down on that and the collapse of those water ducts, if there are people standing around, they're going right in that hole, right? I did not know until I seen the pin actually being held in someone's hand. That's all that held up a 3-ton statue from 1955. It was interesting. So we did get, again, external affairs, we did get multiple phone calls on both sides saying that it was the right thing to do. And we also got phone calls saying that we made a mistake. I agree with Ken, again, want to highlight that this is a way for us to preserve this public artwork and a way for us to be able to create conscious dialogue that leads into more understanding of who we are as people. I am personally connected to someone who believes in the Italian history. My wife is Italian, and we've had several conversations around the Columbus statue and what that means for her and her family and their heritage. And I think a lot of times there are these country cultural differences, and understanding what she was taught, understanding what we were taught, and then actually having a conversation around those teachings. And I think this will create that opportunity for us to have that conscious dialogue that I've been blessed to have in my own home.
It's interesting, Jason, you made me think of another point in thinking back to some of the other conversations that we're having at that time. A lot of this conversation is focused on what the statute meant to our residents, where this dialogue, where the decision to remove it came in our city's history in that moment. But in the context of our sister cities relationship, as uncomfortable as some of the initial conversations were with the leadership of Genoa when they heard this news, I remember very distinctly a very uncomfortable Zoom conversation between our mayor and the mayor of Genoa, where he had very strong emotions. We had offended. But in many ways, the whole point of sister cities relationships is to share history and learning and information and understanding each other's culture. And so in a way, this may have actually served to deepen our relationship and make it much more meaningful than perhaps it had been in recent decades, because there wasn't a reason to have the conversation. There wasn't a reason for the good people of Genoa to stop and think about what that statue may mean to some people in this country. And frankly, I don't know that many residents of Columbus stopped and paused to think about what those in Genoa feel by our action. And those conversations happened and are still happening to this date, and in many ways have given birth to this entire process and will certainly inform this process. But it's another positive outcome, I believe, of the decision.
One other group you engaged with was the Art Commission. Can you talk about that interaction and some of the asks made of the Art Commission?
At the end of the day, the statue is a piece of public art. And the Art Commission there is positioned ultimately to make decisions on the placement of and disposition of public art. They have statutory authority. And in many ways, I think this gave birth to a deeper conversation about the role of the Art Commission and really the role of public art in our community. And a conversation that wasn't really being had. And ultimately, when you are thinking about the future of a piece of public art that you're removing, you need to lean on experts, those who have been engaged, who bring the right perspective to help inform and ultimately decide the future. And the Art Commission was that organization, that group. We're fortunate that it was in place, and grateful that they were willing to take up the issue and help guide the process.
Jason, do you mind talking about getting connected with the Mellon Foundation and kicking off this new process?
Absolutely. So after the statute committee was formed and went through the process and had dialogue around the statute, I was always wondering, what's going to happen next? Where do we go from here? Knowing that, city resources are stretched far and few between and limited, then you called and said I may have an opportunity to engage the Mellon Foundation in this work with the statue. And when you can get dedicated funds that solely focus on a project that we all know is meaningful. And again, we talked about the importance of having this dialogue, a meaningful dialogue. It's, yes, let's take a chance at it. And I remember being on the calls with you and the individual that was working with the Mellon Foundation to identify cities to look at these public artworks and tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth around the artwork. I was excited. I really did feel like we had a good opportunity here to engage with the Mellon Foundation. So after those calls and then a couple emails and sending some letters from the mayor's office with his support, here we are. here we are. So that was a great interaction, a great find, a great opportunity, and hats off to you for that one.
Oh, it was a team effort for sure. And I think something that is really exciting to me is this is such an important local dialogue, but we get to join this national dialogue as well. Can you talk about how you feel about that?
Personally, and I'll share with Ken and kick it over to Ken, but personally for me, to be a part of, as a black man in America, we have to face the wrongs and the indifferences and the injustices that took place in our country's history. That is the only way you will move forward. To keep sweeping it under the rug and saying it's not happening anymore is not true, because it's what the country was built on and founded on. So you have to have these tough but conscious dialogues. And to be a part of that conversation that's happening nationally now, again, like we said earlier, it wasn't just fictitious, hey, this could happen. It was happening. Statues were being taken down. Statues were being defaced for the very same reason, because the history has not been told properly. And to have these monuments that are presented in a way of heroes who did no wrong is not right. And so I get both sides of the argument. I understand that we were taught certain things, but it is time for the miseducation to stop. It is, and I think being a part of that national conversation just gives it more strength, more validity, and shows that Columbus is a place where we can have this dialogue. We are growing as a city, as a region, and it is becoming more diverse every day. This is a welcoming city. This is an open city. This is a diverse city. So we can't say those things if we're not willing to have the tough conversations. And so I think this puts us in a place where we can start having those dialogues from across the country. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this process is exactly what we had envisioned the day that we took the statue down. But truth be told, we had no way of knowing how we were going to do it. Additionally, and from a very pragmatic standpoint, we didn't have the resources to do it. So both from a financial perspective, but then from an expertise and support, this grant opportunity is making real what we had hoped had happened, but didn't know the path. Because the reality is sometimes you make decisions and you know what your intent is and you know where you want it to go next, but you don't always know how. And this is the how. It's wonderful.
What's your hope for the process, for the individuals, for our residents who come to this process and participate? What do you hope their experience is like? What do you hope they share? What do you hope we glean from this process?
For me, I want individuals that engage in this process first to come with an open mind, right? I do believe there are some strong opinions that are at the table. We have to be open and understanding of those opinions, right? First and foremost. But two, I would love for them to walk away and continue the dialogue with somebody different, right? Talk to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, so many others to continue this dialogue. I don't want it to just stop at this process. I want us to do something innovative across with our public artwork, and which will then help us be more intentional when we add pieces to it, how we present pieces. That's where I think the innovation can come in. How do we present these pieces? How do we tell that story in a more holistic way? I think that's the word that I was been looking for, is holistic, right? Let's tell a holistic story. But yeah, I think the one thing I would love to see happen is the innovation of how we present our public artwork, but then also, and probably more so, the dialogue continues so we can continue to keep certain things that we may not know where this conversation will take an individual, but I know it will better the individual on decisions that they make moving forward in their life, whoever they may be, because they've had the conversation, and it may just make them more aware of their surroundings and who they're around. And so hopefully for that resonates from this initiative.
Yeah, very similarly, I hope people feel heard in this process. And to the extent each of us, all of us feel heard, that we're also listening. And then collectively, we decide how we're going to tell our story moving forward. I hope this becomes an example for how we work through issues like this in the future, that this could be a model for how we confront difficult truths, but get to a better place and get better as a community through those conversations, through our collective action. I do hope that the statue is on display again in the proper context so that generations that follow can learn from these experiences what we've lived through and how we get to wherever it is we're going, and so that we can tell our history more completely, and where we can use this as an opportunity to grow and to get better. I'm also interested in seeing what comes next. There's a blank space in front of City Hall right now. I'm excited about the potential for what could fill that space in the future and how collectively we as a community come together to figure out what that is. So this is an incredible opportunity moving forward, not just to hear each other, to work through the pain, all the emotions, to make sure we're hearing each other, that we're listening to each other, but that we're thinking about where do we go from here, how do we learn, how do we get better, how do we do better, not just for those of us who are here today, but those who follow, our kids and their kids.
Yeah, I'm so hopeful this process can teach us how to have these conversations in a way that people feel heard. But we talk about the hard stuff, and right now it's a conversation about symbology, but how can we have the conversation about violence? How can we have the conversation about infant vitality? How can we have conversations about the other change that we want to see in our community? I'm excited that this can teach us that too.
I think with that, Jennifer, I think also, like we stated and like Ken stated in the beginning, the history of the statue it was an international relationship, right? And from that standpoint, in the international mind, it was a gift, right? And so how do we make sure that those conversations don't die on the vine either, right? There is still a global conversation that can happen from this. And so I think we will get to a place where we will have deeper dialogue. And artwork does that. That's what artwork is there for, right? To provoke, to create, to have that dialogue about a piece and what it means to you and how it makes you feel. And it's different for everybody. So I think this is a great way to create that and to possibly highlight Genoa, Italy, and what that means, and for the city of Columbus. They're one of, I believe, several other sister cities. So what does it look like to engage with them as well? So I think we have a great opportunity here.
We are a city named Columbus. What would you like for this space to communicate to people from around the world about who we are as a city named after Christopher Columbus?
Well, off the top, I have no interest, and I don't suspect we're going down the path of renaming our city. In some ways, I think this is an opportunity to define what Columbus really means to us, to our community. And I think part of that is confronting, acknowledging, and understanding from whence we came and how we got to where we are, how we became named Columbus, but then what does that mean moving forward? I'd love to see that being synonymous with welcoming, inclusive, learning, growth. Jason used the word innovation. There is a way to be able to redefine and reposition the name to mean much more than being a namesake, but really about who we are as a people. I think that's the way we have to go, because otherwise we're gonna continue to have conversations and debate about the past. I'd be much more interested in having conversations about how we define what Columbus means for the future.
I agree with Ken. I think we as a community, the collective, we hold the power on what we define our city to be moving forward. And all of the things that Ken said around innovation, welcoming, and all of those things fit into who we are as a city. The name, it does not define what we believe in. It does not define where we are going, our leadership structure, and what they believe in. I think we can use this opportunity to, yes, educate, to, yes, understand where we are or where we were, but we have to definitely create an opportunity for ourselves to define who we are as a community. And I think that's what we'll do with this space and this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for the thoughtful conversation. Thank you for your leadership in getting us to this moment that we can have these really important conversations.
Thanks for picking up and running with it.
Yeah,
Excited.
this was good.
Excited. Looking forward to it.
I'm excited.